The letter arrived on a cold, gray morning, sealed with the Carrington family crest in deep crimson wax. I'd been expecting something like this ever since the call informing me that my father had passed away. We hadn't been close for years. In fact, our relationship had deteriorated into a battlefield of cold shoulders, simmering resentment, and unspoken accusations. Despite that, the news of his death hit me harder than I expected. Alexander Carrington Sr. wasn't an easy man to love or even respect, but he was my father. He loomed over my childhood like a towering oak, casting long shadows that seemed impossible to escape. His word was law, and his expectations were suffocating. Even after I carved out a life of my own, the weight of his disapproval followed me like a specter. When I slit open the envelope, I expected nothing more than dry legal formalities. A list of assets, maybe a probate notice. What I didn't expect was a letter that felt more like a scavenger hunt invitation than an inheritance notification. To truly inherit your legacy, it read, you must find it first. Follow the clues, and you will discover the truth I never shared with you. The estate is more than just land or money, it is a test of character, a reflection of the Carrington bloodline. I reread the letter several times, each word deepening my confusion and irritation. My father had always been a controlling man, but this? Even from beyond the grave, he was playing games. He couldn't just hand over what was rightfully mine. No, he had to make me work for it. Unbelievable! I muttered under my breath, crumpling the letter in my fist before smoothing it out again. The first clue was included, a cryptic reference to an old property on the outskirts of town that I had never heard of. Later that afternoon, I arrived at my father's former office, where his longtime attorney, Peter Grayson, was waiting. Peter was in his mid-40s, with a polished demeanor and a calm, measured tone that had always made me feel uneasy. He didn't seem surprised by the letter's strange contents, which made me wonder just how much of this elaborate plan he had been privy to. This was all part of your father's wishes, Peter explained, handing me a more detailed outline of the inheritance conditions. He believed that certain truths about the Carrington legacy could only be understood by experience. Experience? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. He's making me solve riddles. He knew how much I hated this kind of thing. Peter offered a thin smile. Your father had his reasons. I'll be here to guide you through the legal process, of course. Amanda, my wife, sat beside me during the meeting, though she hardly paid attention. Her manicured nails tapped absently against her phone screen as Peter spoke. I glanced over at her, noticing how detached she seemed. Amanda had never been particularly fond of my family. She barely tolerated my father, whom she often referred to as the old tyrant, behind closed doors. But something else was off today. She wasn't just bored, she was distracted. Are you okay? I whispered under my breath. She blinked as if I had pulled her out of a trance. Yeah, I'm fine, she replied with a quick smile, slipping her phone into her purse. This is all just a lot to take in. I didn't press further, though a small knot of suspicion began forming in my chest. Amanda had been acting strangely for weeks now, more distant, more secretive. I had chalked it up to stress. After all, marriage wasn't easy. But now, sitting beside her as she fidgeted and avoided my gaze, I couldn't help but wonder if something more was going on. Peter continued droning on about the legal conditions, but my mind wandered back to the clue in the letter. An old cabin deep in the woods, apparently forgotten by everyone except my father. It was a strange place to start, but curiosity gnawed at me. Why had he kept this estate hidden from me? I decided to make the trip that weekend and suggested Amanda join me. Maybe this could be a chance to get away from everything, I said casually as we drove home. We've both been stretched thin lately. It could be good for us. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Sure, she said, her tone too neutral to decipher. Maybe some fresh air will do us good. As we prepared for the trip over the next few days, Amanda's behavior grew more puzzling. She was constantly glued to her phone, stepping out of the room to take calls she claimed were work-related. At night, she lay stiffly beside me in bed, as though a wall of invisible tension separated us. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that we were just going through a rough patch and that this trip might help mend the distance between us. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. By the time we hit the road that Saturday morning, I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't just searching for my father's estate. I was searching for answers that neither Amanda nor Peter seemed eager to provide. What I didn't know yet was that the truth I was chasing would unravel not only my father's secrets, but also my marriage. The drive to the cabin was quiet, almost eerily so. Amanda sat beside me, scrolling through her phone while the steady hum of the tires filled the silence. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road ahead, but my mind was swirling with doubts. She had agreed to come, but she wasn't really here, not mentally. Amanda had always been ambitious, sharp, and beautiful in a way that made men double-take when she entered a room. It was one of the things that had drawn me to her in the first place. But ambition had its price. Lately, she'd seemed more concerned with networking and appearances than with us. Her job as a PR manager meant she was constantly surrounded by powerful people, always looking for the next opportunity. And now, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. She sighed suddenly, breaking the silence. "Are we almost there? I've got a call at 4 I need to take." "Yeah," I muttered. "Just a few more miles." She nodded and went back to her phone. I glanced at her briefly, catching a glimpse of the reflection on the screen. A message popped up. Peter was the contact name. I couldn't see the full text, but I caught enough to make my pulse quicken. "Looking forward to seeing you again soon. Peter Grayson. The lawyer. My father's trusted advisor." Why the hell was he messaging Amanda like that? "Who's texting you?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Amanda stiffened for a moment before giving a dismissive shrug. "Just someone from work. Nothing important." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "Must be important if they're texting you on a weekend." She shot me a sideways glance. "Really, Nick? You're going to start grilling me about my messages now? Don't be paranoid." Paranoid. The word hit like a slap. Maybe I was being paranoid. Or maybe she was gaslighting me. Either way, I didn't push further. The road narrowed as we entered a wooded area, the tall pines casting long shadows over the dirt path. The cabin came into view at the top of a small hill. It was more rundown than I expected, shutters hanging loose, the roof sagging slightly. It didn't look like anyone had set foot here in years. We parked and stepped out into the crisp air. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the breeze. "This is it?" Amanda asked, wrinkling her nose. "Looks like something out of a horror movie." "Yeah, well, it's not exactly the Ritz," I said, grabbing the keys from my pocket. We climbed the creaking steps to the front door. I inserted the key and turned it, the old lock groaning in protest. The door swung open, revealing a musty interior. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs stretched across the corners of the room. I took a deep breath, the smell of damp wood filling my lungs. Amanda hesitated at the threshold. "You seriously want us to stay here? Nick, this place looks like it's going to collapse. It's part of the game, remember? My father wanted me to find something here. Might as well start looking." She sighed but followed me inside, glancing nervously around as though expecting something to jump out at her. I flicked on a flashlight and began exploring. There was a main living area with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with rusted appliances, and a staircase leading to a loft. I found a box of my father's old documents in one corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. As I sifted through the papers, Amanda wandered off, her footsteps echoing on the creaky floorboards. For the next half hour, I pored over every file, every photograph. Most of it seemed mundane, financial records, letters from business partners. But then I found something that made my stomach drop. It was an old photograph of my father standing with Peter Grayson. They were much younger, smiling in front of a house I didn't recognize. Scrawled on the back was a note in my father's handwriting. "Trust is earned, not given. Some betrayals start where you least expect." I stared at the words, a chill creeping up my spine. My father had known something he hadn't told me. Was he trying to warn me about Peter? Or someone else? Before I could dwell on it, Amanda's voice called from upstairs. Nick! Come up here! You need to see this. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way up the rickety staircase. Amanda stood at the end of the loft, staring at a hidden door partially obscured by a dusty bookshelf. The door was cracked open, revealing a dark passage leading further into the cabin. Found your father's secret lair, Amanda said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. But I could see the unease in her eyes. We stepped through the hidden doorway, the narrow passageway forcing us to walk single file. The air grew colder the further we went. Finally, we reached a small room at the end of the corridor. Inside was a desk, an old typewriter, and another letter addressed to me. The envelope was yellowed with age, the wax seal still intact. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. You've made it this far, it read. But the truth you seek lies in the people around you. Beware those who wear masks. I glanced at Amanda, who was now examining the room with feigned indifference. I felt the knot of suspicion tighten once more. The game had only just begun, but I was already beginning to understand. My father wasn't just testing me, he was testing us. The air in the secret room felt colder than it should have been, as though the walls were soaked in old, hidden memories. I reread the letter in my hands, each word echoing ominously in my mind. Beware those who wear masks. Amanda stood near the desk, her fingertips brushing the edge of the typewriter. She seemed to be waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't ready to share the contents of the letter, not yet. If there was one thing my father had taught me, it was that trust could be a dangerous thing. This room's like something out of a spy movie, Amanda said with a half-hearted chuckle. Think he was hiding treasure in here? Maybe, I muttered, slipping the letter into my pocket. Or maybe he just wanted to mess with me one last time. Amanda didn't respond. She walked around the room, inspecting every corner. I watched her closely, trying to read her expression. Was she just curious, or was there something more beneath the surface? She'd been acting strangely since the moment we got here, and that message from Peter was still gnawing at me. Do you really think this inheritance is worth all these hoops your dad made you jump through? She asked, her voice light but probing. It's not about the money, I replied, my eyes narrowing. This is about control. He wanted to prove something. Maybe he didn't think I was capable of handling the legacy. Legacy, she repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Something in her tone set off alarm bells. I wanted to believe she was here to support me, but the doubt was growing louder in my mind. I thought about that text from Peter. I didn't have proof yet, but my instincts were rarely wrong. If Amanda and Peter had something going on behind my back. I shook the thought away for the moment. Jumping to conclusions wouldn't help. I needed more information. We should keep looking, I said, pulling open a drawer on the desk. Inside were a set of keys and an old leather-bound journal with my father's initials engraved on the cover. I flipped through the pages, scanning for anything that might provide clues. Most of it was filled with notes about his business dealings, but a few entries stood out, cryptic references to betrayal and a hidden agenda involving Peter. My pulse quickened. He knew. Amanda leaned over my shoulder, her perfume faint but familiar. What's that? Just some notes, I said, shutting the journal abruptly. She frowned but didn't push further. Well, I'm going to check out the rest of the cabin. Let me know if you find anything interesting. I watched her leave, her footsteps echoing down the narrow corridor. Once she was gone, I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. My mind was racing with questions. If my father had known Peter couldn't be trusted, why had he kept him so close all these years? And why was Amanda suddenly so interested in all of this? After searching the room thoroughly and finding nothing else of note, I decided to regroup. I grabbed the keys from the desk and made my way back to the main cabin. Amanda was in the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets. She didn't look up when I entered. You find anything? I asked casually. Just some expired canned food, she replied with a shrug. I think this place has been abandoned for at least a decade. I nodded, pretending to focus on the keys in my hand. One of them had a tag attached to it with a handwritten note. Safe House, St. Augustine. St. Augustine. That was hours away, but the name stirred something in the back of my mind. My father had taken me there once when I was a child. He'd said something about family history, though I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Amanda's voice broke my train of thought. Are we staying here tonight? Or are you planning to drive back to town? Let's stay, I said. We've already made the trip. Might as well see if there's more to uncover. She hesitated, then nodded. Fine. But I'm not sleeping in a place with spiders. You're going to clean that loft. I chuckled despite myself. Yes, ma'am. That night, after a meager dinner of snacks we'd brought along, we settled into separate rooms, her in the loft, me on a battered couch downstairs. I couldn't sleep. The journal's words replayed in my mind. Trust is earned, not given. The line about betrayal had struck a nerve. I'd built my entire life on the assumption that those closest to me would always have my back. But what if that trust had been misplaced? Around midnight, I heard Amanda's footsteps above me, pacing. Maybe she couldn't sleep either. I thought about going upstairs to check on her, but something held me back. I didn't want another argument, not tonight. Instead, I turned over and tried to focus on the steady creaking of the cabin in the wind. The shadows stretched long across the walls, and somewhere deep in the woods, an owl hooted. Despite the eerie stillness of the place, I finally drifted off into a restless sleep. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the coffee table. The screen glowed in the darkness, Peter's name. I hesitated for a moment before answering. What is it? I whispered, keeping my voice low. Nick. Peter's voice came through, tense and urgent. We need to talk. There are things you don't know about your father's plans. My stomach tightened. What things? Not over the phone, he said quickly. Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. I glanced at the staircase leading to the loft. Amanda was still pacing. Whatever secrets my father had kept, I was starting to realize that they had tentacles reaching into every part of my life, including my marriage. I'll be there, I said and ended the call. Morning came too soon. I hadn't slept more than a few hours, and it showed. My mind kept replaying Peter's urgent words from the night before. There are things you don't know. I sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing my temples, while the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Amanda was already up, dressed in a sleek blouse and jeans, her makeup meticulously applied despite the rustic setting. She glanced at me from over her coffee mug, her eyes narrowing slightly. You look like hell, she said with a half-smirk. Didn't sleep much, I replied flatly. Nightmares? Something like that. She didn't press further, which was fine by me. The tension between us hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. I wasn't sure when it had started exactly, maybe before this trip, maybe even before my father died, but it was undeniable now. We were two people walking on opposite sides of a widening chasm. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. For a few moments, the only sound was the quiet clink of her spoon stirring sugar into her mug. So, what's next? Amanda asked eventually. I shrugged, pretending to focus on the keys in my pocket. There's another property tied to the inheritance. I'm going to check it out. St. Augustine, right? She said, catching me off guard. How did you? You were mumbling in your sleep, she said with a small smile. Kept saying something about a safe house. Figured it was important. I felt a jolt of paranoia. Had she really heard me, or had she seen the tag on the key and concocted the story to cover it up? I didn't know which was worse, the idea that she was playing games with me or the possibility that I was losing trust in my own wife. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice neutral. My father used to talk about St. Augustine. I think there's something there. Amanda leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. Sounds like a fun little adventure. Maybe I'll tag along. I froze for a moment. The idea of having her with me made my skin crawl, not because I didn't want her there, but because I couldn't shake the feeling that she had her own agenda. Sure, I said after a pause. Could be good to have an extra set of eyes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give when you've already won a game that your opponent doesn't know he's playing. We packed up quickly and hit the road. The drive to St. Augustine was long and uneventful, the miles stretching out under a bright, cloudless sky. Amanda scrolled through her phone for most of the trip, occasionally glancing out the window with a bored expression. I couldn't stop thinking about Peter. What exactly was he planning to tell me? And why had he sounded so nervous? As we approached the outskirts of St. Augustine, a feeling of déjà vu washed over me. The old cobblestone streets, the historic buildings, it all seemed familiar, though I hadn't been here since I was a kid. We found the address listed on the tag, a modest brick house nestled behind a wrought iron gate. Amanda peered out the window. This doesn't look like a safe house. More like something out of a history tour. Yeah, I muttered, stepping out of the car. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. The house was eerily quiet, as though it had been waiting for me. I approached the front door and inserted the key. It turned smoothly, and the door swung inward with a soft groan. The interior was sparsely furnished, just a few pieces of antique furniture, and a large wooden chest sitting in the center of the living room. Amanda followed me inside, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Your dad had a thing for mystery, didn't he? She remarked, eyeing the chest. Apparently, I said, kneeling to inspect it. The chest was locked, but the keys I had brought with me included one that fit perfectly. I turned it and lifted the lid, revealing a collection of old documents, photographs, and a single sealed envelope addressed to me. Amanda crouched beside me, curiosity lighting up her face. What is it? More puzzles, I muttered, breaking the seal on the envelope. Inside was another letter from my father. The handwriting was unmistakable, though the tone was colder than the first letter. If you've made it this far, you already know that trust is your greatest weakness. People will betray you for money, for power, for love. Beware the ones closest to you. My hands trembled slightly as I read the words. Amanda leaned closer, trying to peek over my shoulder. What does it say? She asked, her voice too casual. Nothing important, I lied, folding the letter and slipping it into my pocket. Just more of my dad's ramblings. She frowned but didn't press further. Instead, she turned her attention to the rest of the documents in the chest, rifling through them with an air of detachment. I watched her carefully, every movement fueling my growing paranoia. Was she really just curious, or was she looking for something specific? I stood abruptly, locking the chest again. We'll go through this later, I said. For now, let's check the rest of the house. Amanda gave me a long, unreadable look before standing. Lead the way. As we explored the house, I felt like a stranger walking through someone else's memories. My father had left this place for a reason, but I couldn't figure out why. And with Amanda shadowing my every step, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched in more ways than one. Something was coming. I didn't know what yet, but the walls were closing in. And I wasn't sure of who I could trust anymore. The house felt alive with shadows, each creak of the floorboards and rustle of old curtains setting my nerves on edge. Amanda wandered through the hallways with a quiet curiosity, her gaze lingering on the faded portraits and cracked walls. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I didn't trust it. After finding nothing significant on the first floor, we headed upstairs. The wooden staircase groaned under our weight, as if warning us not to go further. The upper level was much like the rest of the house, dusty and forgotten. There were 2 bedrooms and a small study at the end of the hall. I'll check this room, Amanda said, pointing to the study. All right, I replied, watching as she disappeared inside. I chose the nearest bedroom and began my search. The room smelled faintly of old wood and mothballs. A large bed dominated the space, its frame intricately carved with patterns that looked vaguely familiar, like something from my childhood. I pulled open a dresser drawer and found nothing but faded linens. The closet yielded no better results. I was about to move on when I noticed something odd. A loose floorboard near the foot of the bed. I crouched down, prying it up with the edge of my keys. Beneath the floorboard was a small metal box. It was locked, but it didn't take long to find a tiny key taped to the underside of the bed frame. I unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of letters, all addressed to my father. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakably intimate. I scanned the first few lines of one letter. Alex, you've always known how this would end. You can't trust Peter, and you certainly can't trust your son to figure it out on his own. If you're reading this, then you know the truth already. I felt a wave of nausea. Who had written these letters? And why was my father keeping them hidden here? The mention of Peter wasn't surprising, but the cryptic warning about me sent a chill down my spine. Nick! Amanda's voice echoed from down the hall. I quickly replaced the letters, locked the box, and slipped the key into my pocket. Whatever was happening here, I needed to stay ahead of it. I placed the floorboard back and rose to my feet, heading toward the study. Amanda was standing near a tall bookshelf, her eyes wide with excitement. Look at this, she said, pointing to an open drawer built into the base of the shelf. Inside was a set of old maps, along with a journal written in the same handwriting as the letter I'd just found. It's like your dad had an entire conspiracy mapped out, she continued, flipping through the pages. He was tracking properties, investments, people. I approached cautiously. The maps were hand-drawn, showing various estates and landmarks, some of which I recognized from my father's stories. He never mentioned any of this to me, I murmured, examining the pages. Maybe he didn't think you needed to know, Amanda suggested, though her voice was tinged with something else, almost like suspicion. I met her gaze. What exactly are you looking for, Amanda? She blinked, taken aback. What do you mean? You've been acting strange ever since we got here. And now you're suddenly very interested in my father's secrets. She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You think I'm hiding something? I don't know, I admitted. But I know you've been distant lately. And that text from Peter. Her eyes narrowed. You went through my phone? I didn't have to. You're not exactly subtle. Amanda scoffed, shaking her head. You're unbelievable. You dragged me out to this creepy cabin in the middle of nowhere and now you're accusing me of, what, exactly? Cheating? Plotting against you? I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know what I was accusing her of. All I had were fragments, Peter's message, her strange behavior, my father's ominous warnings. It felt like standing in the eye of a storm, surrounded by chaos but unable to see the source. I just want to know the truth, I finally said. Yeah? Well, maybe you should take a good look at yourself first, she snapped. Your paranoia is starting to sound a lot like your father's. He was obsessed with control, with people betraying him. Maybe you inherited more from him than you realize. Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I turned back to the journal on the desk. The entries were fragmented, detailing meetings with lawyers and cryptic notes about inheritance rights. One line caught my attention. The real danger is within. They'll never see it coming. I closed the journal and exhaled slowly. We're going to figure this out, I said, more to myself than to Amanda. She didn't respond. The silence between us was deafening. The rest of the day passed in a tense blur. We continued searching the house, finding more fragments of my father's plans but no clear answers. By evening, we were both exhausted and barely speaking to each other. I lay on the couch once again, staring at the cracked ceiling above me. My father's warnings, Amanda's words, and Peter's message all swirled in my mind like a storm. I didn't know who to trust anymore. But one thing was clear, the game wasn't over yet. And if I didn't figure it out soon, it might destroy me. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. The house was silent otherwise, bathed in the pale glow of dawn. I sat up, listening carefully. Someone was moving quietly around the property. Amanda was still asleep upstairs, or at least I thought she was. I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously moved toward the front door, every instinct on high alert. The cold morning air hit me as I stepped outside. The surrounding woods loomed like dark sentinels, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. "Peter?" I called out softly, half expecting to see him emerge from the shadows. There was no response, but I saw movement near the gate. A figure in a dark coat stood just beyond the fence, watching me. As I approached, I recognized Peter's face, his features tense and strained. "You couldn't wait until daylight?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Peter stepped closer, glancing nervously around. "We need to talk. Now." I opened the gate and let him in, leading him to the side of the house where Amanda wouldn't hear us. His eyes darted around like a man being hunted. "What's going on?" I demanded. "You said there were things I didn't know. Start talking." Peter exhaled shakily. "Your father, he wasn't the man you thought he was. He was paranoid, always looking for threats where there weren't any. But sometimes he was right." I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "Cut the cryptic bullshit. What does this have to do with me? And why are you messaging my wife?" Peter stiffened. "Amanda and I, it's not what you think." "Really?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like betrayal." He raised his hands defensively. "I've known Amanda for a long time. We worked together on some of your father's legal matters before you two got married. When your dad started laying out the conditions of his inheritance, she reached out to me for advice." "Advice?" I repeated, my voice cold. "Yes," Peter said firmly. "She was worried about how the inheritance might affect your relationship. She wanted to protect you from your father's games. But things escalated." "Escalated how?" Peter hesitated, then glanced toward the house. "Your father knew about Amanda's ambitions. He knew how easily people could be tempted by money and power. He set this whole thing up to test both of you. He wanted to see who would stay loyal and who would turn." My stomach churned. "And you think Amanda's turning against me?" "I don't know," Peter admitted. "But I do know that your father planted seeds of doubt in everyone around you, including me. He was always testing, always manipulating. He believed betrayal was inevitable." I took a step back, my mind reeling. My father had orchestrated this entire nightmare, pulling strings from beyond the grave. But what I couldn't understand was Amanda's role in all of it. Was she a pawn, or had she become a player in her own right? "Tell me everything," I said through gritted teeth. Peter nodded slowly. "Your father made me swear never to reveal certain details until after his death. But here's the truth. He suspected Amanda and I might be close to crossing a line, professionally and personally. He used that suspicion to pit us against each other, planting evidence to make both of us doubt your trust. That's why I reached out to her, to try to stop this from spiraling out of control. And yet here we are," I muttered bitterly. Peter shook his head. "Nick, you have to understand, he thrived on control. Everything you're experiencing right now, all the paranoia, all the tension with Amanda, it's exactly what he wanted." I clenched my fists. The weight of my father's manipulation pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. "So, what's your angle? Why are you here?" Peter hesitated before answering. "Because I want out. I'm done being your father's puppet. But if you want to survive this, you need to stop playing his game." I stared at him, the distrust still burning in my chest. But before I could respond, a voice called out from the house. "Nick?" Amanda's silhouette appeared in the doorway. "What's going on out here?" Peter tensed, his eyes darting toward me. "Just taking care of some business," I said, forcing a neutral tone. Peter stopped by with more documents. Amanda crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "At this hour?" "Urgent matters don't wait," Peter interjected smoothly. "I'll be on my way now. Just wanted to drop this off." He handed me a sealed envelope before turning to leave. I watched as he disappeared into the woods, the tension between Amanda and me thickening with every passing second. She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing. "What's really going on, Nick?" I sighed heavily. "We need to talk." But not here. Let's go inside. The conversation that followed was brutal. Amanda admitted she'd been keeping things from me, but not in the way I expected. She explained how my father's paranoia had affected their relationship too, how Peter had warned her about the inheritance conditions and the mind games that came with them. "You think I've been plotting against you," she said quietly. "But I've been trying to protect us from falling into his trap." "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice raw. "Because I didn't know if you'd believe me. You've been on edge ever since this whole inheritance thing started. You've been distant, suspicious, like him." The words cut deep. I wanted to defend myself, to insist that I wasn't like my father. But a part of me knew she was right. "I don't know who to trust anymore," I admitted. "Maybe we should figure that out together," she said, her tone softer now. For the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But trust was fragile, and my father's shadow loomed large over both of us. Later that night, as Amanda slept upstairs, I opened the envelope Peter had left behind. Inside was another letter from my father. "You've reached the next stage. Now, the real test begins." I crushed the letter in my fist. The game wasn't over yet. But this time, I wasn't going to play by his rules. By morning, I had decided on one thing. I wasn't going to let my father's twisted game control me anymore. If he thought I'd dance like a puppet while he pulled the strings from the grave, he had another thing coming. Amanda and I barely spoke over breakfast. The air between us remained tense, though there was a tentative truce in place after last night's revelations. We were both on edge, both waiting for the next move. But unlike before, I wasn't going to react blindly. "Are we heading to the next property today?" Amanda finally asked, breaking the silence. "Not yet," I said, sipping my coffee. "We need more information. I want to meet with Peter again, on neutral ground." Her brow furrowed. "You really trust him after everything?" "No," I admitted. "But I trust that he's desperate. He wants out of this just as much as we do. That makes him predictable." Amanda nodded slowly, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. Truthfully, either was I. But Peter was the only lead I had, and if there was one thing I'd learned in life, it was that desperate men often reveal more than they intend. By mid-morning, we were back on the road, heading toward a secluded cafe on the outskirts of town where I'd arranged to meet Peter. I didn't tell Amanda all the details of the meeting, just enough to keep her in the loop. Trust between us was still fragile, and I wasn't ready to share everything yet. The cafe was quiet, nestled between rows of ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. I parked in a corner spot, scanning the area for anything suspicious. Amanda stayed in the car while I went inside, the bell above the door jingling softly as I entered. Peter was already there, seated in a booth near the back. He looked worse than he had the night before, dark circles under his eyes, his posture tense and defensive. I slid into the seat across from him, not bothering with pleasantries. "You've got 5 minutes," I said. "Start talking." Peter sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "All right. Here's the truth. Your father knew more about betrayal than anyone else because he'd lived through it. He trusted me once, trusted a lot of people, but that trust was shattered by greed and ambition. He saw it coming from all sides, and he built this whole inheritance game to expose who you could rely on and who you couldn't." "And you?" I asked. "Where do you fit into all this?" "I was his insurance policy," Peter admitted. "He told me to watch over you, to see how you handled the pressure. If you cracked, if you gave in to paranoia or manipulation, I was supposed to step in." I scoffed. "So you're the referee in this circus?" "Something like that," Peter muttered. "But things got complicated. Your father didn't account for one thing, Amanda." "Of course he didn't," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Women are always the wild card, right?" Peter shook his head. "It's not like that. Amanda is smarter than your father gave her credit for. She's been playing this game too, but not in the way you think. She's been trying to protect you from falling into the same trap that destroyed your father's relationships." By sneaking around behind my back with you, I challenged. Peter leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. It wasn't like that. She came to me for advice because she didn't know how deep this rabbit hole went. Your father set her up to fail. He wanted you to believe she'd betray you. The words hit harder than I expected. A part of me had been clinging to the idea that Amanda was the enemy, that she was the one betraying me. But now, the picture was becoming more complex, more dangerous. So what now? I asked, my tone cautious. Now you need to take control, Peter said. Your father's legacy isn't just about wealth or property. It's about power, who controls the narrative, who comes out on top when the dust settles. I sat back, processing his words. This wasn't just a game to expose betrayal. It was a test of leadership, of whether I could rise above the lies and manipulation. I'm done playing by his rules, I said quietly. Good, Peter replied. But be careful. There are others who have a stake in this, people who won't hesitate to use violence to get what they want. Violence? I narrowed my eyes. Peter nodded grimly. Your father had enemies. Some of them think you're an easy target now that he's gone. You're not just fighting ghosts, Nick. You're fighting people who want to see you fail. After the meeting, I returned to the car, my mind racing. Amanda looked up from her phone as I got in. Well? She asked. He gave me some warnings, I said vaguely. But it's time we stopped reacting. We need to make the next move. And what's the next move? I started the engine, a determined calm settling over me. We're going to the next property. But this time, we're going to be prepared. Amanda didn't press for details, though I could see the questions in her eyes. I wasn't ready to give her all the answers yet, not until I was sure where her loyalties lay. As we drove away from the cafe, I couldn't shake Peter's final warning. There were enemies in the shadows, people who would stop at nothing to take what was mine. But if they thought I was going to crumble under pressure, they were dead wrong. The drive to the next property was heavy with silence. Amanda and I were both lost in our own thoughts, though the tension between us had dulled to a quiet unease. The morning sun was already high by the time we crossed into the rural outskirts of the state. Fields stretched endlessly on either side of the narrow road, broken only by occasional fences and weather-beaten farmhouses. The property was listed as an abandoned estate near a forgotten stretch of land my father had once purchased. According to the documents Peter had slipped me, this place was meant to serve as a secondary fallback location, something he'd described cryptically as the place where truths unravel. We arrived at the entrance, a rusted metal gate chained shut with a heavy padlock. I stepped out of the car, the keys Peter had given me jingling softly in my pocket. Amanda got out as well, glancing around the desolate landscape. Are you sure this is the right place? She asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. It's what the documents said, I replied, approaching the gate. I found the right key and unlocked the padlock with a click. The gate groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing across the empty fields. Amanda followed close behind as we made our way up a dirt path lined with overgrown weeds. In the distance, the estate came into view, a crumbling mansion that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. This is unsettling, Amanda muttered. She wasn't wrong. The house loomed ahead like a forgotten relic from another era. Its windows were dark and hollow, and ivy crept up the stone walls like veins. I felt a familiar chill crawl down my spine, the same sensation I'd had at the cabin. My father's presence was everywhere, even in death. Let's get this over with, I said, leading the way to the front entrance. The inside of the mansion was worse than I expected. Dust blanketed the floor, and broken furniture lay scattered across the room. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banister warped and cracked. The air was stale and oppressive, as though the house itself resented our intrusion. Amanda took a cautious step forward, her footsteps muffled by the dust. What exactly are we looking for? Clues. Documents. Anything that connects the dots, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure what we'd find. We split up to search the main floor. I moved through a series of rooms, an old library, a dining hall with a collapsed ceiling, and what looked like a parlor with shattered glass littering the floor. Every room carried the weight of forgotten secrets. In the library, I found a large, ornate desk. I rifled through the drawers, finding little more than moldy papers and rusted keys. Just as I was about to give up, my hand brushed against something hidden beneath the bottom drawer. I pulled it out, a sealed envelope marked with my father's initials. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message scrawled in his unmistakable handwriting. "The danger is closer than you think. Watch the ones who smile." A shiver ran through me. I stuffed the letter into my pocket and turned back toward the main hall. I found Amanda near the staircase, inspecting a faded portrait on the wall. It was a family painting, though the faces were hard to make out beneath layers of grime. She seemed deep in thought, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the frame. "Find anything?" I asked, my voice startling her slightly. She shook her head. "Just this. I think it might be your father and his business partners. Hard to tell." I glanced at the painting, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. My father stood at the center, flanked by two other men and a woman whose features were obscured. Something about their posture seemed off, tense, as if they were posing for more than just a portrait. "I found a letter," I said quietly. "Another warning." "Of course you did," Amanda muttered, crossing her arms. "Let me guess, it's another cryptic message about betrayal?" I sighed. "Pretty much. But this time, it's more specific. He mentioned the ones who smile." Amanda's eyes narrowed. "You think he was talking about Peter?" "Maybe. Or maybe someone else entirely," I replied. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Nick, we can't keep chasing ghosts. If we don't figure this out soon, it's going to tear us apart." "I know," I said softly. "But if my father went through all this trouble, there's got to be a reason. He knew something worth hiding." Amanda nodded reluctantly, and we continued our search. But the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing minute. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist, and the creaking of the old mansion echoed like whispered warnings. It wasn't long before we discovered the basement entrance, a hidden door tucked behind a large bookcase. The staircase leading down was steep and narrow, the darkness below almost impenetrable. "You've got to be kidding me," Amanda muttered. "Stay close," I said, switching on my flashlight. We descended carefully, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a large, cavernous room. Old crates and filing cabinets lined the walls, and a faint, musty smell permeated the space. Amanda shivered. "This place is giving me the creeps." "Me too," I admitted, though I tried to keep my voice steady. We began opening the crates, finding stacks of old documents and ledgers. It was clear that this room had once been some kind of records archive, but most of the papers were too damaged to read. Then, in the far corner, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a file labeled with my name. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were photos, candid shots of me taken over the years. Some were from recent events, others from childhood. There were also surveillance reports, detailing my movements in the weeks leading up to my father's death. Amanda peered over my shoulder, her eyes widening. "What the hell is this?" "Someone's been watching me," I said, my voice hollow. "And I think my father knew." The walls seemed to close in around us as the weight of the discovery settled. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. We were being hunted, and the enemy was already inside the game. Amanda and I stood frozen, staring at the file in my hands. The photos of me, the surveillance logs, they painted a chilling picture. Someone had been watching me for years, monitoring my every move. This was more than just my father's paranoia. "This isn't just your dad's game anymore," Amanda whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "No," I muttered, clenching the file. "It's bigger than that. Someone else is pulling strings now." We rifled through the rest of the documents, uncovering more unsettling details. One of the reports mentioned coded transactions tied to offshore accounts linked to both Peter and another name I didn't expect, Amanda. Care to explain this? I asked, holding up the report. Amanda stared at the document in shock. I don't know what that is. I swear. Your name's right here, Amanda. Offshore accounts, suspicious activity. You've been hiding something. She shook her head vehemently. No, Nick, I haven't. I don't even have offshore accounts. Your father probably planted that to make you doubt me, just like he did with Peter. The rational part of me knew that was possible, but trust was a fragile thing at this point. I took a deep breath, trying to clear the fog of paranoia clouding my mind. Let's just keep looking, I said tightly. We continued searching the room. I found another folder labeled with my father's handwriting. Final contingency. Inside was a map marked with several key locations, properties, businesses, safe houses. One location was circled in red ink. It's another estate, Amanda murmured, looking over my shoulder. In the middle of nowhere. He wanted me to go there, I said, my voice low. This is the final step in the game. Amanda crossed her arms. And what happens if we go there? Another clue? Another trap? I don't know, I admitted. But we don't have a choice. Whoever's behind this, they're not going to stop until we find out the truth. The drive to the final estate was tense and silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every car that appeared in the rearview mirror made my muscles tighten. Amanda sat beside me, scrolling through her phone nervously. I don't like this, she said quietly. Neither do I replied. But we have to finish this. As we approached the property, the sky darkened with storm clouds. The road twisted through dense woods, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. Finally, the house came into view, a sprawling mansion with Gothic architecture that seemed designed to intimidate. Your dad really had a thing for creepy houses, Amanda muttered. I forced a weak smile. Yeah. Looks like something out of a horror movie. We parked near the front entrance, the gravel crunching underfoot as we stepped out. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and distant thunder rumbled ominously. I grabbed a flashlight and led the way inside. The interior of the mansion was eerily quiet. Unlike the previous properties, this one seemed better maintained. The furniture was intact, and the floors were free of dust. It was as if someone had been keeping the place ready for our arrival. Someone's been here, Amanda said, her voice hushed. Yeah, I agreed, my grip tightening on the flashlight. We moved through the rooms cautiously, checking every corner and shadow. It wasn't long before we found what we were looking for, a hidden door in the study, concealed behind a bookshelf. I pushed it open, revealing a staircase leading downward. You've got to be kidding me, Amanda muttered. Let's just get this over with, I said, stepping onto the stairs. The basement was vast and cold, with walls lined with security monitors and filing cabinets. At the center of the room was a large metal safe. I approached it slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The safe door was unlocked. I swung it open, expecting more documents or valuables. Instead, I found a single item, a video recorder. Amanda peered over my shoulder. A camera? That's it. I picked it up and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing an image of my father seated at a desk. He looked older, more haggard than I remembered, his eyes weary but sharp. If you're watching this, he began, then you've reached the final stage of my plan. You're probably wondering why I put you through all this, why I made you question everyone around you. Amanda and I exchanged a glance. My legacy was never just about wealth, my father continued. It was about power. And power comes from knowing the truth, about yourself, about others. I built this game to test you, to see if you could handle the weight of that truth. He paused, his expression hardening. You've probably realized by now that Peter and Amanda were never your enemies. They were meant to guide you, to push you to your limits. But there is a real threat, one that I couldn't fully contain. People who wanted to see our family destroyed. You need to be ready for them. The screen flickered again, and the video cut off abruptly. What the hell does that mean? Amanda asked. Who's the real threat? I don't know, I said, my voice tight. But we're about to find out. Suddenly, a noise echoed from upstairs, heavy footsteps. Someone's here, Amanda whispered, her eyes wide. Stay behind me, I said, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. We crept back toward the staircase, every step slow and deliberate. The footsteps grew louder, moving through the house above us. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be quiet. As we reached the top of the stairs, I saw a figure standing near the front entrance. A man in a black suit, his face obscured by shadow. He turned toward us, and for a brief moment our eyes met. Nick Carrington, he said, his voice cold and measured. We've been waiting for you. My blood ran cold. Whoever this was, they weren't here by accident. The final stage of my father's game had just begun, and now the stakes were life or death. The man in the black suit stood motionless, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't flinch as I stepped forward, Amanda close behind me. Who the hell are you? I demanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. He smirked, a subtle, condescending twist of his lips. A messenger. Your father and I had an arrangement. But it seems he's no longer around to keep his promises. You're one of the people he warned me about, I said, piecing the puzzle together. You've been watching me, monitoring everything I do. Smart, the man replied with a slow nod. He taught you well. But this isn't about surveillance anymore. This is about control. You've inherited more than just property, Nick. You've inherited enemies. And now you have a choice to make. Amanda tensed beside me. What choice? The man's gaze shifted to her, his eyes gleaming with interest. Simple. You walk away from all of this, give up the estate, the businesses, the power your father built, or you fight to keep it and risk losing everything, including her. His words hit like a punch to the gut. This was a trap, just like my father had warned. But it wasn't just a test anymore. It was a full-blown power play. If I walked away, these people would take everything he had left behind. If I fought, I'd have to face enemies I didn't fully understand. Why should I trust anything you say? I asked, my jaw tightening. You shouldn't, the man replied with a shrug. But trust isn't what this is about. It's about survival. Your father understood that. The silence that followed was suffocating. Amanda's hand brushed against mine, a quiet reassurance. I met her eyes and saw the fear there, but also determination. We were in this together, whether I liked it or not. Nick, she whispered, we have to be smart about this. If we fight, we need leverage. Leverage. The word echoed in my mind. My father's entire life had been built on secrets and control. Somewhere in this estate, there had to be something we could use, something that could turn the tables. I took a slow breath, keeping my focus on the man in the suit. You think you have all the power here, I said quietly. But you've underestimated me. You came here expecting me to be scared. Weak. That was your first mistake. The man's smirk faltered slightly. Bold words. Let's see if you can back them up. I can, I said. But not on your terms. Without warning, I threw the flashlight at him, the heavy metal clanging loudly as he flinched and stumbled back. In that split second, I grabbed Amanda's hand and pulled her toward the side entrance. Go! I barked, shoving the door open. We sprinted into the dense woods surrounding the estate, the sound of shouts and footsteps behind us. Branches scratched at my face and arms as we weaved through the trees, the adrenaline keeping me moving despite the fear clawing at my chest. Nick, they're gaining on us. Amanda gasped. Keep moving, I urged, scanning the terrain for anything that could give us an advantage. Up ahead, I spotted an old stone structure, possibly a storage shed or a storm bunker. I yanked Amanda toward it, slamming the rusted door shut behind us. Inside, It was pitch dark except for the faint glow of my phone's screen. Amanda leaned against the wall, panting heavily. "What now?" she asked between breaths. I pulled out the envelope from earlier, the one with the final map. There had to be something here that could help us. As I unfolded the map, my eyes locked onto a symbol marked near our location, Emergency Access Point. This isn't just a storage shed, I realized. It's part of the estate's defense system. I searched the walls, feeling for anything out of place. My fingers brushed against a hidden panel. With a click, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a small cache of weapons and communication equipment. Amanda stared in disbelief. "Your dad really prepared for everything, didn't he?" "Apparently," I muttered, grabbing a pistol and a radio. I tuned the radio to a private frequency. "Peter, you better pick up," I hissed into the receiver. A burst of static answered, followed by Peter's strained voice. "Nick? What's going on?" "We've got company," I said. "People who aren't interested in negotiating. I need backup now." "Where are you?" "Estate perimeter near the storm shelter." "Hurry." Peter's voice crackled with urgency. "I'm on my way." "Stay low." I clipped the radio to my belt and turned to Amanda. "We're not alone in this. Peter's coming." "Are you sure we can trust him?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "But right now, we don't have a choice." The minutes dragged by as we waited. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, then faded again. I tightened my grip on the pistol, every sense on high alert. Finally, headlights cut through the darkness outside. A black SUV screeched to a halt, and Peter jumped out, flanked by 2 armed men. "Nick!" he called out. I opened the shelter door cautiously. "You're late." Peter scowled. "Traffic." He handed me a spare radio. "They won't stop until they get what they want. We need to end this now." "Agreed," I said grimly. Together, we formed a plan. It was time to face these enemies head-on, not as pawns, but as the ones in control. An hour later, the confrontation reached its climax. Under cover of darkness, we outmaneuvered the intruders. By the time the dust settled, several of them were captured, and the rest had fled. "You did good," Peter said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Thanks," I muttered, exhausted. Amanda approached, her eyes meeting mine. "It's over, for now." "Yeah," I said softly. "But we're not done. We're going to take control of this legacy, and no one's going to tear it apart again." Together, we walked back toward the mansion, ready to rebuild on our own terms. The game was over. And I had won.